Hello, for anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Elaine, as Martin said. I work for the local record centre in South East Wales, so we're just outside Cardiff. And I'm going to talk a bit about an event we ran this summer called Wales Garden BioBlitz that we sort of adapted to lockdown by creating this event. Next slide, please, Martin. So how did we get here? Basically, each year in Wales, we have an event, sort of a week-long festival, I suppose it is, called Wales Nature Week, which would normally involve a lot of outdoor events organised by local authorities and other organisations. Obviously this year, because it was in early June, it wasn't possible to have many outdoor events, or any in fact at the time. So we were asked by the organisers of Wales Nature Week to create a recording event that could be done from home. So the 4 record centres in Wales work very closely together, so we came together as a team. And we decided to adapt the concept of Garden BioBlitz, which was a national event that ran from 2013 to 2017. So that was organised by a few different organisations on a national level, and we kind of took their idea and adapted it to a Wales-only event. Next slide, please, Martin. So how do we set up? How do we get going? I imagine that the majority of people here know what a BioBlitz is and have experienced one themselves, but just in case you haven't, a normal BioBlitz is an event where recorders and generally members of the public are asked to come together on a site on a particular date to record as many species as possible, to create a big species list for that site. Quite often they're large public-facing events with different timed sessions and experts doing some teaching, etc. Obviously this year it was impossible to meet in person, certainly at the time in Wales. So a Garden BioBlitz is a very similar concept, but rather than gathering in one place, we asked people to spend a day looking in their garden, or if they didn't have a garden, they could go to their park, a local park or whatever, to just build up a species list basically and learn a bit more about what was on their doorstep. So a big part of the setup was data flow, because obviously if you go and ask people to record in this way, it's going to result hopefully in a lot of data. So we wanted to make things as simple as possible, both for ourselves as the record centres, but particularly for the recorders. So we were hoping, and did get a lot of established recorders involved, and we didn't want to interrupt their existing recording system. So established recorders know what they like, they know how they want to share data, and we said to them, do what you normally do. We'll worry about the data gathering at the other end of it. So if they were MapMate users or iRecord users, if they wanted to email us data or send in a spreadsheet, it was all fine. They could do what they liked. For newcomers, so we imagined that this event would probably attract some new recorders because it was a bit more high profile. We suggested the use of the iRecord system, but in the local version. So each of the 4 Welsh record centres have their own local version of iRecord online on the website. So we suggested that they use those. Or alternatively, we have the Lurk Wales app. So that's the iRecord app in a bilingual Welsh version. So we suggested that to newcomers as well. And then from our point of view as data managers, we were thinking, how can we deal with this large amount of data coming in the simplest way possible? So we just made the decision that we were going to include all records that came in with that date on it. So it may be that some of the data, the people who sent it in didn't realise they were taking part in Wales Garden BioBlitz, but we just decided it was the simplest way to gather the data together. So anything that came in with that date on has gone into our pot of the total species list, etc. Then we need to be able to communicate this to everybody. It was a reasonably complex concept for certainly newcomers to explain. All of the record centres have their own email lists, so we sent out instructions via email. We all have social media presences, so we came up with a Twitter hashtag and created Facebook events so people could. It wasn't just about communicating us to recorders, we wanted recorders to be able to communicate with each other. So the social media side of things allowed that to happen. We also came up with a timetable for the day, which is fairly common for BioBlitzes. so that we could sort of say, go and look for this thing at this time, and that sort of kept people on message, kept them engaged with the day. And then the final thing we wanted to do before we started was to make sure there was a good feedback loop in place. So people were taking the time to do this recording, go out and spend the day in their garden. We wanted to make sure that we fed back to them like the headline data totals, the national list, etc., in a timely manner. Because the worst thing is if you put time into something and then you never hear back about how it went. So we had a deadline for people to send their data in, and then we had a deadline within the alerts to get the data together and to create national lists, etc. Next slide, please, Martin. So what were those headline results? Very pleased to say that it was the most prolific recording day in Wales to date from the Record Centre's point of view. We had over 7,000 records come in of over 1,500 different species, which is brilliant. I think that shows the amount of knowledge and skills that are in the recording community in Wales. And then we had over 250 individuals get involved as well. Next slide, please, Martin. So if we analyze the data a bit more, hopefully you can read this. This is the top 10 species, so these are the most prolifically recorded during the day, and they're color-coded. So light blue is birds, red is insects, and the green are plants. So as you can see, it's very much dominated by birds. As an entomologist, I was very pleased to see that a moth made it into the top 10. So heart and dot moth was very prolific this spring, so it made sense that that made it into the top 10. And then we have a couple of plants that made it in as well. I mean, the great thing about this event was that we weren't rarity chasing, as others have mentioned earlier this morning. It's really important to keep recording the common things, because if we don't have that baseline data, we don't know when things are changing. So, I mean, how often do you think to record the daisies in your lawn if you're not asked to do it by somebody? So it is great to see that we got some common plants in this top 10 as well. Next slide, please, Martin. So this is drilling down into the data a little bit more. So this is the number of records per taxon group, so per like birds, plants, etc. So here we can see the top 3 groups that made it into the top 10 species. Flowering plants in the green, far and away the most number of records, nearly 2,000 of those. Then we have birds at nearly 1,200, and then moths, just about 700 different records. And then we had a lot of other species, as you can see. I think we had about 35 taxon groups recorded, which was great. I think that worms might have been the lowest. Sorry, Keiron. I think there was 1 worm record. So yes, if we go to the next slide, please, Martin. So this is the number of species divided by taxon group. So we can see again that plants come up top. So plants are very biodiverse, and people recorded a lot of different species of them. Then we have moths, around 300 species. So again, they're quite a biodiverse group, got a lot of different species recorded. And then we have to go down quite a long way to get to birds. Less than 100 bird species were recorded. So when we compare that to the number of records, we can see why birds are dominated the top 10, because they're not a very biodiverse group, but we got a lot of records. So all that data comes together to make a bird-heavy species list. And that is the case with a lot of data management, a lot of data projects. Birds are very popular to record, and there is always sort of a heavy weighting giving to birds when you look at top 10s, etc. Blackbird always seems to come out on top whenever you look at data in this way, in Wales at least. Next slide, please, Martin. So I thought I'd share some pretty pictures, because we also all like to look at pretty pictures. So I'm just going to show some example records from the different time slots that we did. So at 5 AM we had a dawn chorus time slot. I'm not sure that many people made it to this one. I certainly didn't, but we still got a lot of bird records. So this is a lovely picture of a house sparrow by Pip Gray, and we have over 55,000 Welsh records. But as I said, it was important still to get the common species recorded. Next slide, please, Martin. Then at 8 AM we had a marvellous moths slot. So we basically, the Record Centre staff all put their moth traps out the night before, and we shared pictures of highlights from those. And I was pretty jealous of my manager and his wife, who got this pretty hawk moth in their trap on the morning. And we have less than 1,500 records of this species in Wales, so quite a nice one to get. Next slide, please, Martin. Then at 11 AM we had a perfect pollinators slot, so we suggested that people maybe sit and look at a flower bed or some flower pots for some time and see what turned up. I wanted to highlight a fly in this presentation because they're often overlooked as pollinators. This is a sheepstrike greenbottle, photographed by Howard Burt, also known as the common greenbottle, and we only have 80 Welsh records, which sort of shows how diptera are very overlooked and recorded, because this is the common greenbottle. This is the one that people see a lot, but they're a little bit tricky to identify, so they don't get recorded. Next slide, please, Martin. Then at 2 o'clock we had a fantastic flowers session. So we specifically asked people to look for wildflowers and what they might consider to be weeds in their garden. We didn't really want a lot of people recording what they had planted in their garden themselves. So we said to sort of look in pavement cracks, look in your flower beds and in your lawn and see what wildflowers there were. And we got quite a lot of daisy records. It made it into the top 10. This photo is by Gareth Farr, and we have over 17,000 Welsh records of daisy. Next slide, please, Martin. Then at 5 o'clock we had a cool creepy crawly session, a little bit more vague than the other sessions, but basically we told people to, you know, look under rocks, check under log piles, etc., to see if they could find wood lice, that sort of thing. I wanted to share this very charismatic looking insect, the woolly vine scale insect that Dave Slade found in his garden, because there is only 2 Welsh records of it, and the other Welsh record is from Dave's previous garden. So this is very much an overlooked species. It was good to get this record in. Next slide, please, Martin. And then at 9 o'clock, to finish the day off, we had a twilight highlight session. So some people were really lucky. They get hedgehogs in their garden, like this one from Chris Jones. We got a lot of nice bat records, and one person even had a glowworm in their garden, which is fantastic to hear about. And then we have nearly 15,000 records of hedgehog in Wales. Next slide, please, Martin. So as well as the data results themselves, we also considered engagement as a measurement of success. So to measure this, we looked at the social media engagement totals, the geographic spread of recordings, so how many different people in different communities we'd reached, and also we looked at the more subjective comments on social media to gauge the enjoyment of recorders and staff. Next slide, please, Martin. So social media side of things, we had created the hashtag Wales Garden BioBlitz, and we had an analysis done of that, which told us we had 346 original tweets by 87 different accounts. So that's people actually typing out their own tweet about what they'd seen or whatever. And then we had 576 retweets from 220 different accounts. That's different accounts sharing what the original tweeters had said. Then on Facebook engagement, which is always a little bit more of a vague grey area for me, we had about 300 people who replied to events saying that they were interested in or attending the events, and we also had a reach of over 5,500 people. I'm never quite sure what that means, but it sounds impressive. Next slide, please, Martin. And then we had a look at the geographic spread, so how many people across Wales had we reached and how many people had engaged with the event. So this is quite a simplistic map, which shows every 10 kilometre square that had at least one record in during the day. So it was great to see that, I mean, we had a great spread across the country. Certainly in mid Wales and in the west, it's very sparsely populated from a human point of view. So it was great that we managed, I think we probably got records from every unitary authority in Wales, which is great. Next slide, please, Martin. Then this is a slightly more sophisticated analysis of that data. So This is a heat map. So the lighter the colour, or the brighter the colour, the more records there were in that location. So this is almost a map really of the human population in Wales. You can see the South Wales Valley and Cardiff down in the southeast, and then Swansea, and then up in the north we've got Wrexham and Bangor, very well represented. But there are also some highlights in other places which show individual efforts. So that really bright yellow up in sort of North Mid Wales and over in Pembrokeshire on the coast, those yellow circles are probably one or two individuals that have really made a difference by recording a lot during the day. So this map really shows the group effort, but also highlights the individual effort that was put in during the day. Next slide, please, Martin. And then the final thing we looked at is the more subjective comments that we got. So these are all Twitter comments that we got to show that people enjoyed themselves. So Adam Rowe said it was possibly my favourite event of all time in Lurks, and he's been in Lurks a long time, so that's great to hear. Claire Boyes got a green hair streak in her garden, the 30th species for her garden, which is amazing. I'm very jealous. I think I get about 5 species in mine. And then Kate Stinchcombe said, knowing that I was recording at the same time as my friends and colleagues across Wales was a great experience. And that sort of feedback was great to hear, because at the time we were in full lockdown in Wales, so people couldn't, they could travel 5 miles to exercise, they couldn't drive to exercise, it was impossible to meet with people from other households. So it was really good to see that people did feel that they were connected with other recorders by this event. Certainly felt that myself, like there was so much activity on our social media feeds, and it really felt like people were coming together at a time when it was impossible to meet in person. Next slide, please, Martin. So if you want to find out more, you can look at the hashtag Wales Garden BioBlitz on Twitter, which has got lots of lovely photos and stuff like that. And then on the Subrec website, we have a web page with a full species list for Wales and some other statistics and stuff like that. I think the other Welsh record centres will also have pages on their websites with that sort of information on. But yeah, thank you for listening, and any questions?
Great, thank you very much, Elaine. That was a really lovely talk, and yeah, it must have been so lovely to be part of that kind of community spirit of getting everybody together at the same time. It's really lovely, and I love the themes as well throughout the day. That's really cool. I like that. They've been very nice. So we've got a question. Yeah, saying how did you deal with the records outside of your record centre area? Do all the local record centres in Wales share data, or does it go into a national pot?
So we got some through email that were for other record centres. Basically, the 4 record centres in Wales have a consortium, and we share data between the 4 of us. So if data comes in, we'll probably process it at Subrec or whichever record centre it is, and then we share it back out through a national database called Aderin. So we have a website that the 4 record centres feed data into and take data out of for our commercial products and stuff like that. So we work very closely together, so it wasn't really a problem. I don't think we got any English data, certainly not in Subrec area, so that didn't come up. But if we did, we would share it with the relevant record centre. Cool.
And then another question was, were any records done on permanent recording sites, and what was the frequency of the BioBlitz? I think you said it was once a year, but yeah, it'd be good to know.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any like official surveying that was going on at the time. You couldn't leave your house unless it was for an essential purpose in Wales. We were a bit stricter than in England, and in fact we're going back into that scenario from 6 o'clock tonight, so it's going to be same, but this was the first time we'd run an event like this, so we did one for Wales Nature Week, which is beginning of June, and we're planning to do it on a yearly basis going forward. So but there is a possibility that we could do it more frequently than once a year, but this year it was just the one time.
Brilliant, thank you. That was a fantastic talk. Thank you. I have a question for Elaine. Did you or your experts provide ID help for people? If so, how? As that's one of the main helps with an in-person BioBlitz.
Yeah, so it wasn't ideal from a teaching point of view to have this type of event, but we made our Twitter channel open to people asking questions. So we tried to get answers for ID questions. Obviously, it's not always possible to identify from photographs, so it was a little bit challenging. We also have Facebook groups, so that's where recorders can speak to each other. So we did encourage people to use that so they could directly connect with experts in that group as well. But it wasn't ideal. We did the best we could.
Yeah, I know, and great work given the circumstances. It's fantastic. Another one for Elaine. This one was I'm trying to find ways to engage with community. I'm trying to find ways to engage communities with their local green spaces during the times of COVID-19. Oh, I found it very helpful. Sorry, that was just a comment. Sorry, yeah, but well done anyway. Well done. How well was iRecord received? Did people want to use other platforms like iSpot, iNaturalist, PlantNet, etc.?
So because we have a local version of iRecord, it's kind of our recommended route. 3 of the 4 Welsh record centres would recommend that route normally. I don't know what to say about iNaturalist. It's been kind of a disruptive technology that's kind of affecting all of the recording community at the moment, because it's proving so popular with members of the public, but it's not really synced into the existing recording systems yet. So we weren't recommending that. It's brilliant for identification, and I'd say the same for iSpot. But for those 2 technologies, I wouldn't consider them to be recording. I'd consider them to be identification resources. So I think we are working on getting records that come in through iNaturalist, but it's not quite there yet. So we didn't have any negative feedback about iRecord. I think it's kind of accepted as the way forward for recording it at the moment.
Cool, thank you. Did Martin, do you have anything to come back on with that? Not come back on, but like to add as well on that?
Probably not. I mean, as Elaine says, we're all aware that iNaturalist has a lot of strengths and is a really good platform in many ways. And the issue of how we can get it to look better with the existing recording network is being looked at from various perspectives. So I don't think anybody's got any sort of magic solutions at the moment, but hopefully we will find a way of getting that linked in a bit better.
Cool. There was another question actually on that sort of line around there are many apps on ID and recording, and how do we encourage people to use iRecord?
Promoting it, well, I guess, as much as possible.
Yeah.
Trying to make, I think the great thing about iRecord is that you can make local versions, so it really suits the user. So I guess just continue to create our own versions of things that will work. I'll let Martin talk more because he basically is iRecord at the moment.
Oh no, and Kieran's got a pause up as well. So yeah.
Yeah.
You go ahead, Keiron.
Apparently, I love iRecord more than Martin anyway. So, so there's a couple of things that I try and teach in my course that I think that we need to make very clear and be unapologetic about. So I have no stake in iRecord, so I can be less diplomatic than other people will be. And first of all, iRecord is not for profit. It was built by the BRC to support the recording schemes, and it's accessible to all the record centres if they choose to download from it. So on that note, it means that if you're going through iRecord, the data is technically accessible to any national recording scheme or any local environmental record centre should that scheme or record centre choose to engage with it. Things like iNaturalist, that comes from a more commercial background, and like Elaine said, it's not actually about recording, it's more about ID. So yeah, first thing, it was built for the recording sector to get records to where they were supposed to go. The other thing that I think we absolutely need to make sure that we do is unashamedly dispel the misconceptions that are out there about iRecord. So my pet hate is people saying they don't like iRecord because you can't identify everything from a photo. You absolutely can't identify everything from a photo. You can't identify any of my group from a photo, but iRecord has a photo function that is there as an add-on to help it's not a requirement. It's not what iRecord is about. We should remember that iRecord is no different from a spreadsheet in terms of it's a method for getting a record to the relevant verifiers. So that's what I use to sell it, because yeah, and there are many other benefits as well. I won't go on too much. Everybody should sign up to the course. But yeah, I think we should be very unapologetic about how it's the system that we use. And if we want people to get that data to us, that's the system that they'll need to use.
Lovely, thank you. Martin, did you have something on that?
Well, I'm always glad to hear people enthusing about iRecord, since it is a project that I work on. But it is not the only system out there, and there are some, depending on what people are trying to do, there may be other systems that achieve that more effectively. But I think all I would say about all these systems is that if you are wanting to get involved in biological recording, that you do spend some time working out which is going to be the most effective one for getting the records to the places that you need them to go. And I can see that while Keiron was talking, we've had some comments coming in pointing out that iNaturalist is not actually a commercial platform, and that the data is made available. For one thing, it goes straight up to the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, all of which is absolutely fine and good. But at the moment, as Elaine said earlier on, it's not well linked into the UK recording community. And that's something that we need to see if we can fix, because it is a platform that's going to be used. But all these systems have their own strengths and weaknesses. I do think iRecord has got a lot of strengths in the way that it makes data available. It does allow us to get data onto the NBN Atlas very quickly, where all the schemes and centres are engaging with it. But it's a tool like all these others are, and the point is not to get people using iRecord. The point is to get people effectively getting involved with biological recording. And if iRecord helps them do that, fantastic. If other systems are helpful, then that's also good.